what that is.
Hey friends, you're watching BrainStormAcres. I'm Henry.
And I'm Irene.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about buying land in Arizona, New Mexico, and generally speaking, the desert Southwest.
Some of the things we're going to talk about are things that you need to consider no matter where you are, because the laws from state to state and county to county vary hugely.
And they change over time.
Yeah.
For example, when we first moved here 15 years ago, all it took to get a permit to build a building was $35 and a hand-sketched map to the county.
Right.
No big deal.
Right. And it's not that way anymore. And one of the problems is if you move into a county that has super low requirements, they can change them at any time. And they can make your life miserable if you ever decide you want to make an upgrade or change anything. So they'll say, oh yeah, sure, you can do whatever you want. And then the next time you want to do something, maybe you don't think you even need a permit, and somebody shows up at your office, at your homestead, and gives you a cease and desist order from the county because one of your neighbors turns you in.
So let's back up for a second. We live in Arizona. We live in northern Arizona. And we have friends all over the state, from down near the border with Mexico all the way up
Right.
to the northern part of the state.
Right.
So in terms of growing climates, we have a follower up in northeastern Arizona who lives in a 5A growing zone.
Right.
And we have people down south who are in an 8B, I think.
8B or 9, I'm not sure which. Depends on, the altitude is the big trick in Arizona. Every time you change altitude, you change growing conditions dramatically.
So there's a whole lot of things you need to consider when you're looking at land in the Southwest.
Right. And anywhere. The biggest number one thing that I would say is the major issue for 99% of the people I've talked to is water. You can make do with almost anything else, but if you don't have water, and I know of a bunch of YouTube channels that are doing all kinds of water collection, that's awesome. You know what? It didn't rain this year.
No, we had 5.2 inches of rain so far this year, the entire year. That's
Right.
a little bit more than a third of our usual rainfall.
Well, I was actually looking to see if we were like a lone spot in our state, and we're not. Even areas that normally have literally twice or three times as much rain as we do, they might have as much as 7 inches.
Let's talk about a misperception that a lot of people get from watching YouTube. And
Right.
that is that Arizona, the generic Arizona, uses flood irrigation exclusively.
Right.
Well, the answer is it really doesn't. Now, the flood irrigation that you see in the Phoenix and its surrounding areas was formed in around 1900. A group of farmers and ranchers got
Right.
together and they pledged their 200,000 acres of land in order to get a loan from the federal government to build Roosevelt Dam. The whole purpose was to bring water down into the Phoenix Valley.
Right.
And that worked admirably well. But I'll show you a map of how much of Arizona is feeding down to this little teeny portion of the state. We don't have flood irrigation here. In fact, we have no irrigation whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
The only irrigation you ever get here is people who have wells. And they're really deep wells, pump the water up and irrigate their crops that way.
Right. There is some irrigation down in the Chino area. And whether you have it or not will show on the deed for your property.
If you think you've bought a piece of land, you probably haven't bought everything.
That's right.
So in a lot of the U.S., there are issues about who owns the water rights. The water rights, depending on where you live, may just be a normal free-flowing stream. It may be a seasonal stream. It could be the surface water that flows across your land. You may or may not be able to dig a well here or any place else in the country. It all depends on your local laws.
Yeah, you will need a permit even if I can't think of hardly any place that doesn't require a permit anymore, but permits some places are no big deal. Oh, give me $25, you got your permit. But find out what the cost for a permit would be. That because on top of the price of the well, some places it costs you thousands of dollars just for the well permit because they don't want people casually putting in wells and messing up everything else for everybody else.
So here in our part of the state, northern Arizona, specifically where we live, the water aquifer, that's the big reservoir of water that's underground, is about 1,300 feet below the surface.
Mm-hmm.
That's about an $80,000 hole in the ground in order to find out if you can get water. Now, if you just move down the road 25 miles to the south, all of a sudden the aquifer is up to about 500 feet.
Right, that's a lot cheaper.
It's a much less expensive, and you have a good chance of getting water.
In some of those areas, you're not allowed to drill a well. So even though the aquifer is higher and it would be cheaper to drill a well, you will be required to hook up to quote-unquote city water. And some of the city water goes out pretty far. But if you're in an area where there is no city water and you can't hook up to it and you're not allowed to drill a well, now how are you going to create it? Well, in some states it's against the law to gather rainwater.
Yeah, and it's regulated a whole lot of different places.
Mm-hmm. Here, it's not against the law to gather rainwater, but sometimes it doesn't rain.
And when you don't get rain like we had this year, no matter how many gallons of storage you have, if you don't have rainwater to put in the storage, you still have no water. So water is one thing, but access to your property is another one. We live in a nominal subdivision.
Right.
It's about 100,000 acres that was subdivided into more or less 40-acre parcels. Some are 80 acres, and recently they've been able to reduce the size of parcels to 10 acres.
Right.
I think that's the lower limit that you can go right now. Our county has not taken responsibility for the main road that comes into our subdivision.
Right.
It's paid for the first 2 miles from the county road all the way into the edge of the property here. But that's 2.5 miles from our house.
Right.
And when it's muddy or rainy, well, we haven't had any rain to speak of this year.
No.
But when it does rain sometimes, the road gets muddy and
sometimes it washes out.
It may become impassable. And we know that in the past 15 years it's become washed out twice, I think.
Yeah, completely washed out twice. Well, and there's other roads like one of our viewers from down south, Courts Junction, I think.
Yes.
The road he lives off of. When we do get flash floods, there's over 100 yards wide there that will go 2 feet deep. So you're not crossing that with anything. You're just not. You wait until that water is down.
So access is one thing. The other thing is when you buy a piece of property, you may or may not have mineral rights. And the tricky part about mineral rights is if somebody else owns mineral rights, that means they can come in and dig up the ground where you live.
Right, and it depends on the state as to exactly how much of a mess they can make and whether they have to restore it when they're done. Make sure you know what goes on in your state. Some states you don't have the mineral rights. Also, there's utility rights. We have a utility easement that runs along the edge of our property. So if APS or somebody else someday decided they needed to run a high tension wire through here, they have the right to do that. Is it 20 feet wide there?
It's actually 100 feet wide in one area and 50 feet wide in another area.
Okay, so you wouldn't want to build a house in that area.
Well, you can, but...
Legally you can, but if you did, you could have a problem later on.
They could come in with a trencher and go right over the top of your house.
Yeah.
You have to pay attention.
You have to pay attention. You have to make sure you're getting your mail and that you read it. Don't assume it's just something annoying. Make sure you read it because...
Yeah, their beautiful view of the Pacific Ocean was obstructed because she was out of town, he didn't pay attention, and
they missed the deadline to complain. They had the right to say no to that structure. They had the right to say, no, you're impeding my view of the Pacific Ocean.
There's an awful lot of things that you need to be concerned about when you buy a piece of property. Generally speaking, if you're buying something close into town, you can rely mostly on a real estate agent. And I say mostly because
Yes.
real estate agents aren't required to disclose everything to you in some states. Some places they're obligated to
Yeah.
disclose everything that they know about the property if you ask.
Yes.
But
So be sure to ask.
One of the other things that we have here is because we live in the Southwest, our part of the state is open range. Now, open range means that cattle are run out here, and it's your job to fence them out if you don't want them on your property.
Right, and along with the open range concept, comes what they call tanks. Tanks are
Holes in the ground with water.
right. They're like little ponds. They're man-made, and in years that have rain, they will fill with water, and it will say on your deed whether you have a tank on your property or not. If you have a public tank on your property, you have to allow access for the range cattle.
Right.
I do know that the law says that you can't fence a tank off.
Yeah, now, different states have different rules. Arizona is very much a ranching state.
Yes.